will. We pray that you will bless the proceedings today, bless our speaker or presenter, Dr. Campbell, at this time. May you overshadow him, that as he speaks, your Holy Spirit will speak through him to us. And may we be blessed, may we be encouraged, may we be edified to not only hear your word, but to be doers of your word. And we ask you, dear Lord, that you will help us as we prepare ourselves for this journey that we are on, that you will keep us faithful, help us to internalize all we learn so that we will be fit for your kingdom. In Jesus' name we pray and we give you thanks. Amen.
Amen.
All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And in Guyana, when it's an in-between time, we say good day. So I want to say good day to us. So I think that will take care of the time differences. And I want to welcome each one of us on this platform. And to this, our second part of the mental health series. I want to say special welcome to Dr. Campbell. And last week was great, and we're looking forward to today being just as great. So welcome to all, and I trust that we will benefit, that we would be bettered, our lives would be bettered, and others around us would also be impacted in a positive way because of the time we spend here today. So welcome and God bless you.
Dr. Wil Campbell is a Christian psychologist, educator, and consultant. He holds advanced degrees in educational leadership, clinical psychology, and grief and trauma counseling. He is a university lecturer and manages his private counseling practice. Dr. Campbell has a passion for promoting mental and emotional wellness and receives great joy seeing broken relationships made whole again. He is happily married with 2 adult daughters, loves the Lord, and enjoys sports, music, photography, and gardening.
Well, as you can see, Dr. Campbell is no stranger to Macy, and so I will not delay the time he has set aside to present to us today in anger management. Dr. Campbell, all over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sister Dawn, and good day to everyone. I think that covers it. So today we're going to talk about anger. We're going to get right into it. Please permit me to share my screen. As we discuss this topic that is a topic that is very vital, very important. All of us experience anger, and it is easy when a person is angry, and we're going to understand why in a few moments, to do things that that person does not, would not ordinarily do, and maybe doesn't want to do. And it is really important that we learn to manage our anger. Some people say control. I have an issue with that word, but only because I'm a little bit of an OCD person where words are concerned. I believe that life and death are the power of the tongue. And so I am very careful, or I try to be very careful about what words I use, because what our brain hears is what it does. And we don't necessarily want to control our anger. Control seems like suppressing and not allowing expression. And so I prefer to use the term manage, which is a lot more intentional, and it takes some more effort. So we're going to talk about this issue of anger. Very often when I do anger management training, whether it be, with corporate bodies or students or men in the prison system, men and women in the prison system, I start by asking a question. And so I'm going to do that today or this evening so I'm going to ask you to find your reaction buttons and just raise your hand if you believe that you might have a problem with anger. Do you think that you might have an issue managing your own anger? If you think you might, go ahead and just raise your virtual hands. All right, so far I see 2 responses, and this is not unusual at all. Pretty much every time I do this exercise, there's just 1 or 2 persons who acknowledges that there might be an issue with the way they manage their anger. And by the time we get to the end of the sessions, a lot more people come forward and say, I didn't realize that I wasn't managing my anger in the most productive way, that there are things that I could do better. And one of the reasons for that is that we often blame others for our anger, for the way we respond, for our anger response. And we would say things like, I don't get upset, but when people push me, and if people can push you to respond in a way that is contrary to the will of God, a way that is destructive to relationships, a way that does not honor God, then it means that you are not managing your anger in the way that you should. I want to start by looking at 2 passages of scripture. And this one, it stunned me the first time I really noticed it, because like I shared because I grew up in a Christian home. I grew up in an Adventist home. We had devotions every day. And we read through the Bible, several times as a family. So by the time I left home at age 17 or thereabout, we had gone through the Bible as a family at least 3 times. But every time I read God's word, I find something, and it's as if I've never seen that thing before. I'd never seen that. And so when I saw this a few years ago, it felt like the first time, and it shocked me. The wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. That's the King James Version. What that is saying is that anger, human anger, cannot. That shocked me. Human anger cannot. When we respond out of our anger, our action is invariably dishonorable to God. And that stung me. In fact, every time I read it, I get goosebumps, including now. And so I want us to also look at Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 26, and I'm going to read that for you. It says, let me make sure I get it right. Let not the sun go down on your anger, neither give way to the devil. Let not the sun go down in your anger, neither give way to the devil. And my understanding of that is not necessarily that, it's not talking about sunset necessarily, but it does speak of resolving your conflicts involving anger, making resolution of those conflicts a priority. So, because sometimes you got to sleep on some things, because if you respond in that moment, your response will be dishonorable. And so sometimes it makes sense to sleep on things. So I don't think it is referring necessarily to not letting the sun go down. Of course, if that is your conviction, then go with that. But what it says is that when there is a conflict involving anger, we should not allow it to fester for too long, because when we do that, it creates opening. It creates what some people refer to as portals, where the evil one can infiltrate our relationships and infiltrate our lives, infiltrate our thoughts, infiltrate our actions. And there are some people right on this call who might be able to acknowledge with me that sometimes when we're angry about something, the longer we allow those thoughts to play around in our minds, the angrier we become, and then we start to think of things that we can do. Many times those things are not honorable to God, and they're also damaging to us psychologically. So we're starting on that foundation. And I want to start with a definition for what anger is. It's an emotional response. Anger is an emotional response to a real or perceived injustice. It is important for us to understand that emotions are devoid of logic. All right, the difference between emotions and other mental activities or other mental states is that emotions don't have a logic to them. And that is why sometimes the things that I might find funny, another person might find, might induce anger, because there are no rules where emotions are concerned. All right, our emotions go wherever they choose to go without any logic to it. All right, so when we perceive that someone is wronging us or wronging someone else, perpetrating a wrong towards someone else or towards ourselves, that emotion that we feel is anger. Now, there are other things that feel like anger, and there's a reason for that as well. And the reason for that is that very often we don't have a name for other emotions. So we don't know how to label, we're not sure what we're feeling. And so we channel it through anger, because anger seems to be an easily accessible emotion. It's also important, I like to ask this question as well. I'm not going to ask it today. How many persons get angry? Or is there anyone in here who does not get angry? And I'd always find one or two persons who would say, nothing gets me angry. I don't get angry at all. And I would say to that person, you're either superhuman or something else. Superhuman, or you have a mental problem. Because humans get angry. And I want to say this, that anger is part of the character of God. And that might shock some people. See, we have a God who gets angry, and we were created in his image and in his likeness. So our personality, the emotions that we go through, we receive from God. And so anger is a normal, natural part of the human experience. It is one of a wide range of emotions that humans possess. And so every human gets angry. Some of us learn how to suppress it. Some of us learn how to do what some people call sublimation, which is we find a nice way to explain something to ourselves so that we don't feel the anger, we don't experience the anger, and therefore are not able to process the anger. And that is not always a healthy thing. All right, so it is normal. If you get angry, that's normal. If you get angry, that's natural. It is part of your experience as a human being. If you get angry a lot, all the time, easily, then that is something that we might want to work on. And some people are more emotional than others. And so some people's anger, they experience it much more strongly than others. And some people are triggered more easily than others. sometimes because of their personality, but sometimes because of their experience. So is anger a good thing or a bad thing? I like to do a vote on this one, but I'm not going to do that this morning. Or maybe I should. I already give the response away, the answer away. That anger in itself, like we said, is natural and it is normal, and there's nothing sinful about anger in and of itself. All right, so don't start feeling guilty if you get angry. So anger itself is neither bad nor good, it's just an emotion. And sometimes anger can be useful. And I like to share with people that a lot of the things, a lot of the injustices in this world that have been abolished, the change did not come around until someone got angry and chose to use that anger in a way that got something done. All right, so anger can in fact be useful. Sometimes we're in public and someone is taking advantage on someone else, someone is bullying someone else. It is that anger that causes bystanders to step in and say, hey, you can't continue to do this, stop it. All right, so it can be useful. And it is a way of helping us recognize our boundaries and establish those boundaries so other people know where our boundaries are. The challenge comes when we don't know how to respond in a way that is helpful and that is healthy. All right, so it is our response to the anger that is an issue. The anger itself is not an issue. The anger is a feeling. It is the behavior. It is the thoughts that are chosen, the thought processes that are chosen in response to that anger that could be problematic and that determines, well, it is the response that is good or bad, not the anger in itself. So the instruction that we're given is not don't be angry. There are a lot of feelings that we're told that we should not have, that we're instructed by the word of God that we should not have. Anger is not one of them. It says, be angry. In other words, that emotion is fine. But it's what we do. Be angry and sin not. And then it continues, let not the sun go down on your wrath. In other words, don't hold on to that anger. We can talk a little bit just now about why we tend to hold on to our anger. We need to give place to the devil, because when we hold on to our anger, because the wrath of man cannot fulfill the righteousness of God, the enemy can easily work with our wrath, with our anger, with our resentment, with our bitterness to cause us to do things that are dishonorable to God. So chronic anger. So let me try to explain chronic anger. So there are some diseases that are considered chronic, like diabetes, and for some people, hypertension. For a lot of people, asthma. Those diseases are considered chronic because they're kind of lifetime diseases. Like a person who's diabetic, and this is arguable, of course. Those of us who understand health and healthy eating and healthy lifestyle understands that diabetes does not have to be chronic. But diabetes is considered a chronic disease because it is considered a lifetime disease. As far as medicine, traditional medicine, conventional medicine is concerned, when you're a diabetic for life, and you just have to manage it for the rest of your life. Chronic anger is anger that goes on, that's extensive. You know, people who are easily angered and angry all the time, and their anger just simmers below the surface, waiting for an opportunity to explode. You know, some people are so angry that even when you say nice things to them, they respond negatively. You know, you say to someone, you look great this morning. So don't I look great every morning? You know, you know, some people are just, you know, that anger is just, they're not even aware of it sometimes, just simmering below the surface. And then there are those people who are actually walking around looking for an outlet for that anger. And that kind of anger is really troublesome. That kind of anger is troublesome. That kind of anger finds vent a lot in people who struggle with mental illness. And it also finds vent in people who use substances or who abuse substances, because the frontal lobe, that part of our brain that inhibits bad behavior, is suppressed. And, you know, that's why people who are drunk or people who are high on some kind of drug tend to be more violent, because that side of them that would say, hey, you can't do this, this is not right, is suppressed by the chemical action of those drugs. And so the behavior, there's nothing to stop them, nothing internal to stop them from behaving in that way. So we're talking here about chronic anger, which is we carry around anger inside of us, a lot of us, and we're really not aware of it. And we think it is other people that upset us. You know, it is a toxic environment that we work in. It is my husband who's not behaving the way he should, or my wife who's not, or these children who are not, they're just not hearing, you know, they're not, you know. So, but if you're angry all the time, it's you. Because chronic anger is unnatural. But not only is it unnatural, it is also destructive. So you may be someone with chronic anger and be high functioning or low functioning. And let me share here that a lot of people struggling with depression and anxiety, that depression or that anxiety is just their body's way of containing that anger, because of the fear of what it will do if the anger is allowed to be expressed. All right, so a lot of people struggling with mental illness, including depression and anxiety, are really angry people whose anger doesn't have an outlet. And so it for want of a better word, disguises itself as an illness or in an illness. So there are people who are high functioning, angry people. You know, they don't look angry all the time. They appear to get along with people until they're triggered. And then they're easily triggered. And then there are other people who they're just angry all the time. They're just triggered all the time, to the extent that they can't get along with anyone. They can't hold a job. They have to isolate themselves. So what are some of the effects of chronic anger? First of all, there are physical effects. One guy wrote a book, I don't remember his name, but I think, I read the book and it's really impactful. The body keeps the score. Anger, like every other emotion, it starts with a biological response. Well, it starts with a mental response that triggers a biological response. And so what happens when we become angry is that our body releases stress hormones and puts us in fight or flight mode. And remember, if you're in fight or flight mode continuously, it puts strain on our digestive system. It suppresses digestion so that our bodies can't absorb nutrients efficiently. It suppresses our immune system function so that our bodies can't fight disease and illnesses efficiently. And it puts strain on our cardiovascular system, particularly the heart. It makes your heart work harder than it should. And so it has these physical and biological effects. Now, the effects that I just listed are not visible on the surface. What is visible is that, we start to sweat. Our muscles start to tense. There are some muscles right between the eyes here that start to pull our eyebrows together. And I noticed that I'm developing some permanent wrinkles here. So it means that my eyebrows are pulled together a lot more than they should be, or maybe it's just that time. So that happens. Some people start to tremble when they're angry. Some, the muscles clench, the shoulders tighten. Some people get headaches. Some people start to grind their teeth, and you see this, I was talking to someone the other day. I said, I noticed that you're getting angry. And the person said, I'm not angry, but I could see the muscles at the side here contracting, and, that person was definitely tense. So those are some of the visible physical manifestations of anger. And then we have the social manifestations. Nobody likes to be around people who are angry all the time, except maybe other angry people. But that has a flip too. When we're angry, we generally don't like to have people around us. So we tend to withdraw. So if you're an angry person, people would isolate you. But if you're an angry person, you would also isolate yourself. That's why I don't like to hang out with people, because I know I know people will upset me, and so I I keep to myself. So it affects us socially. There are other ways in which they affect us socially. They damage, they injure our relationships, and sometimes beyond repair, because we say things and we do things that are so hurtful to people that those people determine that they have to separate themselves from us. And people are afraid to communicate with us because they don't know what will trigger us. I remember once going to a particular place, an organization, and the person that I went to see was not there. So I asked if anyone would, could take a message for that person. And, everyone in the room looked at each other, and no one wanted to take the message. I said, what's going on? And somebody boldly said, look, listen, that man comes in here in his moods, and nobody wants to talk to him because we don't know how he will respond. And I said, but it's not something that would upset him. And they said, you don't know what the things that would upset this man. So people don't want to talk to you because they don't know what will trigger you. It affects us emotionally, because I suspect that maybe a large percentage of us here, because we have some angels with us here too, a large percentage of us here have, in anger, done and said things. And then when you got to a place of calm again, you started to think, I really shouldn't have done that. And so there is a guilt. There is guilt. And I remember once I went to a particular place of business, and they were taking a little too long to get my work done. And I was angry because I felt like I was treated unfairly. And I'm ashamed to say this. Y'all gonna forgive me. I know God has. I behaved so badly that I was embarrassed. But when I became calm again, I was ashamed. I sat in a corner and, oh my gosh, all these people saw me misbehaving. They heard my outburst. And a lot of people agreed with me when I was saying what I was saying, because they too felt like I was mistreated. But I knew that the way I behaved was not honorable to God, even though I may have been right. The way I managed it was wrong. And so I was embarrassed. And so emotionally, the shame, the embarrassment, the guilt, those things, it affects us in that way. It affects us mentally. Because if you're carrying around anger, if you're carrying around norepinephrine and cortisol and stress hormones in your bloodstream all the time, it is going to mess with your head. It is going to negatively impact the way your brain works, to the extent that it might rewire your brain in a negative way. And so you can end up with schizophrenia, or you could end up with post-traumatic stress. You can end up with depression and anxiety, and so many other mental challenges. It affects you behaviorally, of course, because like I said, I went into that place and I behaved badly. It was just, I just talked. I didn't knock things over or hit anybody, but I said things. So it affects the way we behave. We might become aggressive, belligerent, etc. And it certainly affects us spiritually, because if we hold on to anger and we don't learn how to manage it, then the actions that we take in anger become, will be sinful actions. Also, maybe it's just me. So let me speak for myself. When I'm really angry, I don't want to pray. I don't want to talk to God. I don't want to have a conversation with God. Sometimes I'm angry with him too. So it is important for us to learn to manage it so that it doesn't separate us from God. And remember, our relationship with God is demonstrated through our relationship with others. So there might be people at church or in my home or next door to me, in the next apartment or wherever, that I'm not talking to. And that separation, that is one that might be one that is dishonorable to God. And that is spiritual. If I'm not getting along with my children, that is spiritual, because I have a responsibility to get along with my children so that I can provide them with guidance and nurturance, etc. So that's spiritual also. So you understand that chronic anger and unmanaged anger can affect every element of our being. What causes people to be angry chronically? Parental abuse and neglect. And I'm going to, because I see names here that I've seen every time I've spoken, I'm going to just move past this, because we've talked about parental abuse and neglect. And we've also said that sometimes we neglect our children without realizing it. We think that we're working hard to take care of them, but we're not able, as a result, to spend enough time with them. And that feels neglectful to them, even if they understand, or they're trying to understand what we're trying to do for them. Abandonment. I'm not going to talk about abandonment. Sometimes we abandon people emotionally, not because we want to, not intentionally, but because we don't know how to connect with them. And we do this to our children a lot, very often because our parents didn't know how to connect with us. And so we never learned how to form those connections. And so we abandon our children. Abandonment is not always physical. It's not always material. Sometimes it is emotional. And so you can be right here saying good morning and good afternoon and how was school every day and still abandoning. Overparenting. Children can become chronically angry because parents are always solving their problems for them, and so they never learn how to manage their own feelings. They never learn how to process their own emotions because their parents are processing it for them. Their parents are dealing with it for them. Permissive parenting, where you just don't provide any boundaries, you don't provide adequate structure, and so they're just allowed to do what they want. And remember that sinful nature comes naturally to us, including sinful anger responses. So they're allowed to do whatever they want, talk to whomever, however they want. That becomes learned behavior, and it becomes chronic. Lack of emotional skills, if we don't teach emotion management, that's a parental responsibility again. But when you become an adult, you can't blame your parents anymore. So now you have a personal responsibility to reparent yourself and learn how to manage emotions. And that's why, I don't remember when it was, but we did talk about emotional intelligence. All right. So we have to learn how to manage our emotional issues. A lot of people in the context of marriages don't know how to behave when the other party doesn't do what they want them to do. And sometimes, again, that happens, not always, but sometimes that happens because our parents responded in a particular way. So if you grew up in a home where when you didn't do what was required of you, you just got beaten, what you learned, maybe unintentionally, was if people don't do what I want them to do, What I want them to do, I should just beat them. And unfortunately, that happens in marriages. And it goes both ways, but it usually goes from male to female because men are generally physically stronger and men are generally more anger repressed. And so they're more likely to express their emotions through aggression, lack of unmet expectations. Sometimes we become angry because people have lied to us too many times. They've promised and not delivered too many times, and so we develop feelings of anger and resentment. But sometimes that anger is at ourselves. Sometimes we don't meet our own expectations, and that's the worst kind of disappointment to deal with, when you're disappointed with yourself. When we're disappointed with ourselves, we can't beat ourselves up, so we tend to beat up on other people. Sometimes physically, but very often emotionally and verbally and psychologically. Unresolved trauma. If we've had experiences that were damaging to us emotionally and psychologically, and we weren't able to process it, that stress that is left in our bodies, that post-traumatic stress, can cause us to respond in angry ways. So let's do a little bit of neurochemistry here, neurobiology. Our brains have several sections, and we've oversimplified it in this diagram. That little blue spot there, I feel like I've done this before with you, but that little blue spot is called the amygdala. See how tiny it is? Behold what, how is it? Oh, the scripture, what damage a little matter kindleth. See that little tiny spot there? That's the part of the brain that processes emotions. But this part is so powerful that when it is fully aroused, the rest of the brain can shut down, almost literally. Particularly that little orange part, that prefrontal cortex that is found right here behind our foreheads. That prefrontal cortex is a part that does the thinking and the reasoning and the understanding. So this little blue structure here does the thinking. Sorry, does the feeling. And the orange structure does the thinking. But the blue structure, when it is, working at full power, shuts down the orange structure. You getting it? So if I'm really, really, really angry, then I'm not thinking anymore. And sometimes people say, you said it in anger, but you were thinking it all the time. No, not necessarily. I may not have even been thinking it. I'm just angry in this moment. And so it came out and I don't even know where it came from. And so, it's important for us to keep these in balance. There's nothing wrong with having emotions. There's nothing wrong with having feeling, but we must be able to manage emotions in such a way that it does not hijack our ability to think. And that is a psychological term for it. It's called an amygdala hijack. That's when the feeling part of your brain hijacks the rest of your brain, takes control of it, and makes you do things. It makes your hand come out your pocket and connect with people's chins, and it looses your tongue, so you say things that you weren't even thinking about. There are people who would report that when they were angry, when they recovered from an anger attack, people told them that they did things and they couldn't remember, because even the memory function of the brain was shut down. So we have to be, this is why it is so important. I was talking to a gentleman who had killed his partner. And, it was a forensic interview, and he could not remember doing it. He still does not remember it. This is years later. He does not remember doing it. He knows that he did it, but he doesn't remember doing it. He does not remember turning himself over to the police. He doesn't remember anything until he woke up the next day. He said when they put him in the holding cell, he fell asleep, and he woke up maybe 24 hours later because the anger had exhausted him. And people, what am I doing here? He wasn't drunk or anything. What am I doing here? People said, you're in here for the murder of your partner. It's like, oh, wow. What happened? People had to tell him what happened. And that is how powerful the amygdala is. And that is why we are to guard the avenues of our souls, of our minds, because when, so this is the reason why our anger can't produce godly results. Because the part of us through which God communicates shuts down when anger overpowers us. And some of us use anger as a shield to hide what we're really feeling. So some men, not only men, but some men use anger to mask what is really fear. So they're afraid of certain things. And when they're feeling that fear, they don't want to show that weakness. And so they channel that emotion through anger. A lot of times men get into fights because they are afraid that they will lose status, that people will be disrespectful to them, that people would lose respect for them. And so, but what that is really fear. And this is not just men, okay? But apparently this particular response tends to resonate with men more than it does with women. It tends to be more common in men than it is in women. But it does also occur in women. So sometimes we use anger to hide our insecurities. All of us do this sometimes. We feel insecure about something, we act like we're angry because somehow it feels like some measure of protection. Our traumas, there are things inside of us that are hurting us, but we don't know how to express that, and so we use anger as a means of expressing it. But I share with people that we have to deal with what we are actually feeling. We can't, if we're going to be emotionally healthy, and if we're going to please God, we have to learn to deal with exactly what we're feeling. Otherwise, it would be as ineffective as changing your radiator fluid when in fact you have a flat tire. Very often that's what we're doing with our anger and our other emotions. We're feeling jealousy, but we're responding out of anger. We're feeling fear, but we're responding out of anger. We're not dealing with what we're actually feeling. That's a whole nother session, Sister Dawn. I'm not trying to give you ideas here. And then we subscribe to the fallacy that we can earn respect through anger. I hear guys saying this to me all the time, particularly tough guys. If I don't behave like this, people will walk all over me. People will think I'm soft. You don't gain respect through anger. People might be afraid of you, but they don't respect you. We do this with our children too. We behave angrily towards them, hoping that they will obey us. You don't gain respect through anger. What happens is they're afraid of you. But fear is temporary. What happens when their shoulders get bigger than yours and they don't have to be afraid of you anymore? Then that what appeared to be respect disappears because it was in fact fear. So here's what happens when we're angry. An event occurs, and that event is external to us. It is something that is not within us. An event occurs. And that event prompts us to think. And this happens really quickly. And so we process that event through thoughts. And based on what we choose to think, because even though it happens really quickly, it is our choice. So based on what we choose to think, that is what we will begin to feel. And based on how we feel, that is how we will behave. That is how we will act. That is the response that will come out. So here's one way in which it happens. And I see my brother Ray on the call, so I'm gonna use his name. We're brothers now through the same. We've never met, but we're brothers. So let us suppose that I share something, some information about myself with Ray, but it's not something that I want other people to know. But maybe Ray doesn't know that. Or maybe he thinks it's going to be harmless, and so he shares it with someone else. That is the event. I hear that that happens. That, word gets back to me that Ray said, that Wil said. And that word gets back to me. And my thought is, Ray is such a traitor. I can't trust him. I can't depend on him. And so I start to feel betrayed. And I start to feel angry. We've gone down to the emotions part here. Notice that I feel angry because I'm thinking that Ray is such a traitor. I can't depend on him. So I feel betrayed. I feel angry. And my behavior might be that I go to Ray and I said, how could you do such a thing? And or I might just stop talking to him, give him the cold shoulder. That's a behavior as well. But notice it started with a thought. Now, let us suppose that I had chosen a different thought process. Let us suppose when I heard this, I thought to myself, maybe Ray didn't really understand that I didn't want anyone else to know this. Do you realize that the way I would feel about it would be a little different? I will feel a little less betrayed. I'm likely to feel a little less angry. And therefore, my response to Ray would be different. So I may go and talk to Ray about it, but the words I use and the demeanor and the attitude with, the body language with which I say it will be different. So I'm more likely to go to Ray and say, I understand that you shared this with us, and I really did not intend for anyone to know. I'm disappointed that you did that, and I wish that you wouldn't do that in the future. Notice that the behavior here, the action is different because the thoughts were different. And so if we want to change our behaviors, we have to start by changing the way we think, the way we choose to think about things. And I think I'm sharing with you that we're going to have to learn to see people as humans. We're going to have to learn to understand that just because I would not do a particular thing does not mean that the other person might not do it. We have to stop expecting our ideal selves from others. And notice I said our ideal selves, because sometimes we think that we wouldn't do that thing, but that's exactly what we would have done. It's easier to judge another person when they do it because it's not us. So the way we choose to think about a situation will have a really powerful impact ultimately on how we behave in that situation. And because this is a common issue in violent men or men who've been convicted of violent offenses, I usually use what we in Guyana call the mother joke analogy to explain. Sadana, I saw that got your attention really quickly. To explain how this cognitive triangle works. I believe that in most parts of the world, men in particular don't want anyone to say anything bad about their mothers. They get upset really quickly about that. And they would fight about it. They will physically fight if someone says something ill about their mother because they see it as disrespectful to their mother. This is someone that they love. This is someone that they want to protect, etc., etc., etc. So somebody says something to me about my mother, and I think that that person is disrespectful to this woman who raised me, who went through so much, who sacrificed so much so that I could become who I want to be. That's the thought process. And so I feel angry, and I run to that person, I punch them in the face. Check this out. What if I thought, that person doesn't even know my mom. And what they're saying has absolutely no negative effect on my mother anyway. She's still home in her garden, tending to her plants, enjoying herself, thinking about her grandchildren, her children, being happy. And here I am getting into a fight, which, when she hears about it, will cause distress. Now, if I choose to think about it that way, then it would change the way I wouldn't even get angry anymore, because when you say things, and you know what you're saying, first of all, it isn't true. Secondly, you don't even know who you're talking about. And thirdly, even if you did, she wouldn't even know that this is happening. So it wouldn't have any impact on her. So I'm not angry. And I go about my business. My behavior is completely different because I chose to think about it in a different way. When people say negative things about us, are those things true? If it's true, how can I be better? Your emotions will be different and your behaviors will be different. And if it is not true, then does this take $1 out of my bank account? No. Does it take some skin off my back? No. Then why am I losing sleep over it? My emotions are different. My behavior is different. And so if we learn to manage our thoughts, we can change the way we behave. So how can we deal with anger? Because you're not going to be able to think away every anger trigger. There's some things that will, that you need to keep. There's some triggers that we need to. So one of the first things that we need to do is to identify our triggers. What are the things that make me angry? And some of us need to deactivate some of those triggers, because when you think about it, some of the things that make us angry are not even worth the fight. As I would say to the bad boys in prison, some battles are not worth the bullets. And so you got to deactivate those triggers, determine that, you know what, I'm not going to let this anger me anymore. I think one of my final triggers, one of the last triggers I was able to deactivate, I feel so proud of myself, was things that happened in traffic. I was a very calm person, but just traffic, you honking your horn behind me, and I'm the reason I'm not moving is because there's an old lady trying to get across the road. You honking your horn behind me, that I'd get out of my car for that. And I thank God, because that road rage can be deadly. I thank God that He's helped me overcome that particular one. So identify your triggers and deactivate as many of them as possible. But some triggers you need to keep there, because God gave us the capacity for anger for a purpose. Change your irrational thinking. I just talked about I gave the mother joke analogy, because that, some of our thinking is irrational. Another thing that is, thought process that is irrational is that anger will cause people to respect me. That's irrational. And if we change that thinking, it will change the way we behave. If my children are not afraid of me, they will not respect me, they will not be obedient. That is irrational. Change that thinking. Learn different ways of connecting with your children so that they want to listen to you. An important thing that we need to learn is how to slow things down. Quick to hear, slow to speak. That's a biblical injunction. In other words, be willing to listen, but be very measured about how you respond to what you hear. The thing about the cognitive triangle is that it happens in a flash. And if we can learn how to slow that triangle down, if we can learn how to slow that process down, it will give us time to get back to a place where we're calm, and then we're able to think rationally about it. And I learned this from my dad. That was when he learned that we had misbehaved. He didn't respond right away. Unlike Mom. He didn't respond right away. He'd think about it a lot. And then he'd wake us up early the next morning before devotion, and we'd have a conversation about it. And he made sure that we understood that what we did was wrong, that it was contrary to the rule of the home. And then he would hand out the consequence. And I remember sometimes sitting there thinking, Dad, just give me these 6 lashes quickly. because sometimes the conversation was more difficult than the whooping. That was his way of dealing with it. But what I shudder to think what might have happened if he had done it in anger. So we need to learn to slow things down, and it works differently for different people. For some of us, we just need time. For some of us, we need to listen to some soothing music. For some people, they need to listen to some upbeat, aggressive music. And I use the word aggressive very guardedly, because I'm not talking about gangster rap and so on. It might be something that maybe has a little bit of a more up-tempo beat, because for some people, that is what helps them to, release the feelings of anger. A number of persons have said to me that when I get angry, I go and lie down and sleep. If that's what works for you, you do that. Some people, I go and read, or I watch a half-hour comedy show, or some people will tell you count to 10. Some of us, we need more than 10. And so I used to count to 100 because I really struggled with anger when I was younger. And then after a while, 100 got to be nothing. So I started to count to 100 in Spanish, because then, and I'm going to explain the science behind that in a moment, I'd count to 100 in Spanish. And then that became easy. And so I started counting. That has not become easy up to this point, counting backwards from 100 in Spanish. Now, because Spanish is not my first language and I don't know it very well, this is how it works. Let me go back to this. Remember, we talked about the amygdala. When it is aroused, it suppresses the function of the prefrontal cortex. What counting does, the way I do it, the way I advise people to practice it, is it forces the prefrontal cortex to restart. Because if I'm counting backwards in Spanish, I have to think about that. It doesn't come naturally to me. I have to think about it now. While I'm thinking about it, the energy from the amygdala is slowly returning to the prefrontal cortex. So I get to a place where I'm balanced, usually by the time I'm at 90. That's how much thinking I have to do. So that's me, So counting to 10, that's what it is supposed to do. It might not work for you in the way that people say it casually. Figure out what works for you. Here's another thing that works for me. Now, I naturally speak a dialect. I call it a language that we call Guyanese Creole. It's a mixture of English and French and some African languages and some native Amerindian languages, and that's how I would speak normally. But for me to speak standard English, I have to think about what I'm saying. And so when I'm angry, I try to speak the Queen's English as I learned it in school. I make sure that my subject and my verbs agree in number, and the tense is correct, and I make sure that the grammar is right, and I don't end the sentence with a conjunction. And so what that forces me to do is to think. It forces my prefrontal cortex to restart, and it takes some of the energy back from the amygdala. I also force myself to speak slowly, because when I get angry, I talk really fast. Now you can imagine what could come out there before I have the time to hold it back. So I force myself to speak slowly, which forces me to think. I force myself to speak softly because I get loud when I'm angry. I force myself to speak standard English because I have to think to do that. So if ever you and I have a conflict and you hear me speaking slowly in standard English, understand that I am this close to losing my marbles. But I hope you get my point. All right, so we got to learn to slow things down, whatever it takes to slow it down. And that's why I say to people, sometimes the literal sun may need to go down because you may need to sleep on it. Because very often when you wake up next morning, you can't even remember what you were angry about. And now you're in a position to deal with it because you're not dealing with it through your amygdala. You're now dealing with it through your prefrontal cortex. Another way to deal with anger is to get physical. And I don't recommend punching things. People would say, go to a punching bag and punch this bag. I don't recommend that, because if the punching bag is not available, you might punch something or somebody. So I don't recommend that. But, you know, go play some basketball, go for a brisk walk, go to the gym, go jog around the park or around the block. Because that takes energy away from the amygdala, and it releases, instead of the stress hormones, it releases endorphins or feel-good hormones into our systems. All right? So get physical, but do that the right way. Pick your battles. Some things aren't worth fighting for. Oh my goodness. Sometimes the things that we go to war about, and I mean that in a relational sense, those things mean nothing very often. You know, somebody put the milk carton back in the fridge with, you know, and it's empty. Oh, come on. So pick your battles. Some things are not worth fighting for. Here's another one, and this might come across as a little cold, but some people are not worth fighting against. Let me explain that. There are some people who, no matter how you explain yourself, they will not understand what you're trying to say. That battle is a useless one. And then there are some people, they might understand, but they just wouldn't acknowledge. That's a useless battle. And then there are some people who just don't have the capacity. Useless battle. Some people are not at the level of cognitive functioning that you are. God has taken you to a level that is way beyond where, you know, he's still working with them. And so in order for you to be able to connect with them at a conflict level, to match them, you have to take several steps down. That's not a battle worth having. Because when you step down and you beat up a smaller opponent, you know, emotionally or psychologically smaller, then all you're doing is bullying. You've become a bully. And if you win that battle, you've won nothing because you were a bully. And if you lose that battle, as they say in Guyana, you look really thin because, you know, somebody who's smaller than you just beat you up. So pick your battles. Consider other perspectives. Understand that people are not working from the position, from the vantage point that you are working. So they may not understand things your way. It might look like a 6 to you, but it looks like a 9 to them because where you're standing. So sometimes all it takes is for you to have a discussion and go around to their perspective and look at it the way they're looking at it. And then you realize that you two of you are arguing over the same thing. Very often people are arguing and they're both saying the same thing, but because they can't see each other's perspective, they don't realize that they're actually agreeing. So consider other perspective. Resolve outstanding issues, because sometimes when we're angry at people, those are not the people that we're angry with, or that is not the issue that is making us angry. It is something else that we have not dealt with. So those things that you're carrying inside of you that you have not resolved, deal with them. Otherwise, they become chronic anger issues. Sometimes we have to go to anger management class. You know, sometimes we have to go to anger management therapy. Seek professional help if this is beyond you, because sometimes our anger, whatever has caused it, has become habitual and we don't know how to break the habit. Sometimes even after the source of the anger is no longer there, because we're so accustomed to dealing with things in this way, we don't know how to change it. Seek professional help. And there are things that you can't handle. And you know, people ask me sometimes, you know, will you still with this God thing? I can't stop with this God thing. I have to stay close to God because there are so many things that I have to deal with sometimes that I don't know the first thing to do. And it is really reassuring for me that God knows how to manage those things. And so there are things that I can't manage. There are people that I have to deal with that I can't manage, that I can't stand. Let me be honest with you. Let me share my heart with you. There are people that I can't stomach. If I am to respond to them the way my amygdala wants to respond to them, I'm not gonna make it in God's kingdom. So I gotta let God handle that for me. All right. So sometimes I'm going into some meetings and I'm praying on my way in. Lord, and I speak to God in Creolese because that's my language. So it might sound something like this. God, I gotta go in there now. I'll translate it for you just. I gotta go in there now. And me and the man who don't buy a towel. So you gotta handle this for me, please. What I'm saying to God is, Lord, I'm about to have a meeting. And for some reason, I don't get along very well. The person I'm going to meet, we don't see eye to eye. And so I need you to take control of the situation. For those persons who didn't understand what I just said earlier, I let God take care of the things that I can't handle. I hope that has helped. Are there any questions? I know that there are questions. And I know that there are comments. So we have some time to share, I think.
Yes, Brother Ray, go ahead. Your hand is raised.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Dr. Campbell so much for his information because he hit a lot of notes that really hit home. I don't know if you mentioned exactly environment, but for me, I'm here in New York, and one of the things that I realize is that the environment also creates uh, a situation where you almost have to live in a sense of, forgive me, but anger, because it's a defense mechanism in order for people not to take advantage. I think you hit so many different points that I could probably speak to you for hours on everything that you said, because it really makes a world of sense to me. When I was younger, I'll share with you an experience with me is that I was always thinking about how can I better myself and how can I get ahead and how can I do all these things for the sake of my family. And while I'm trying to defend my actions for the sake of my family, I didn't realize that I was putting my family in jeopardy. Now, why I say that is because I think you mentioned a couple of things, like in respect to the mother aspect. In the mother aspect, I feel like myself, you're absolutely right. We're quick to want to defend our mothers, but sometimes in defending the other person, do we really know that person? Because I got to meet my mother in her later years more so as a person than as a mother because I took the time. Thank God that he allowed me to have the time to share with her in her later days. And then I realized, wow, she's not really the person that I thought my mother was. She was a whole lot more. And to some degree, I was like, wow, this is a whole different way of looking at her. And had somebody told me something about her previously, I probably would have defended her, like, no, 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 no. But then I started realizing that she's a whole character and she's a whole lot of stuff. You know, I also want to share with you, you had mentioned about aggressive music. Here in New York, that's a constant thing. Everywhere you go is bah bah bah, all this. And one time, I try to share as fast as I can. One time, I had my post office box in the city, and I would always drive down to pick it up and then come back up. And one day, I got caught in the red light as I'm coming back up, and I was changing the station on the radio, and it got stuck on Hot 97, which is a hip hop channel here. And the light turned green and I'm starting to drive, and I noticed that I'm driving fast and aggressive. I'm going to use your word, aggressive. And then what winds up happening is that I made it home, which normally takes me about half an hour to 45 minutes. I think I made it home in like 20 minutes. And then I said to myself, well, what's the fluke? So when I went back some other time, I said, let me try this again. And I realized that that aggressive music actually allowed me to weave and dodge traffic, but I wasn't myself in a sense. So
Mhm.
everything you're saying is so true. You know, um, I've been blessed because um, I think you said it best. When we turn around and we use that God thing, like you said, to hold on to, you know, God to me is everything because He has allowed me to change who I was to who I am now. I've been blessed with a lot of different things. One of the things that I want to say, thank you, God, is that I've been, since I've been with Macy, I've been able to see a more bigger view of the world because in the little things that I've been so far able to experience, such as a meeting that we had last night with a family. I've learned a lot more, but I say it because I've been blessed. My son, I've been offering people the link to Macy's so they could come and join because I really am happily surprised of what I see what Sister Dawn is doing and what yourself is doing to helping encourage us and to give us enlightenment for all these different topics. And so I'm trying to bring in the community that I know that I'm around, and I'm trying to bring them in. And my oldest son is actually online. I don't know if I'm putting him on the spot, but he could testify that I have probably changed a lot, and it's really I feel it is really a matter of understanding that yeah, when you lose your that thinking process, it really does shut you down, and sometimes you don't realize it until it's too late. So I want to just say thank you so much for the words that you have spoken because they all ring true to me.
Appreciate you, Ray. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing your heart with us today.
Amen. Thank you. Sister Ruth, go ahead.
Um, I have a mouthful to say in so many seconds, but let me see how I can decipher it, that how I can put it over that Doc can understand, is able to decipher and respond. Um, I did not put up my hands earlier when you asked the question because I was thinking if recent changes. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we're hearing you.
Yes. If recent changes to my behavior and how I behave now and so on, if it was helping me to manage my anger. And I think yes and no. And I was a bit confused, so I didn't worry to put up my hand. But I think I'm managing it, and I think I'm not managing it based on what I've learned today. Um, I have a lot of childhood traumas that were suppressed, and from time to time growing up uh, in my adult life, the triggers that would carry me back to those moments, right? And um, and let me give you a quick synopsis in 3 seconds. Let me see if I can do that. In my younger days, I lost a baby at the Georgetown Hospital, and it was carelessness that caused that to happen. And that was something that I suppressed for years. I went about my business as usual. But in my daughter now, in my year presently now, my daughter had a baby. our first baby. It was a boy just like my baby. And carelessness at another city hospital caused the baby to die. And that sent me right back to what happened to me how much years ago. And I literally almost caught the hospital afire. I went in with such a passion, that I did most, I I didn't use coarse words, but the anger that I expressed from the CEO right down, that when they told me that night, when they called not the police, but they called the security and so to put me out because I was really misbehaving. I tell them, don't touch me. I think I had enough strength like Samson that night, that had they touched me, it would have been some other thing, But later on, when I went home and I calmed down, it took an effect on me because I don't trouble with pressure. But my pressure went up to 300 and something, and I don't know how I didn't die. But it made me sick for that like 2 weeks. And after the stress started to ease, the pressure went down, and thing. And after that, every time I talk about it, it used to make my blood boil afresh. And then one day somebody says, sis, you got to start forgiving these people. And I think when I thought about it, that was the only way that helped me to speak about this today to you, that I'm not boiling. So what you said, some things that you said, it makes me really think that how much of us can manage our anger when we are trapped with situations that were never dealt with, and then something triggers it. The other thing I want to ask, and so now by reading and praying and thinking and attending programs such like these, it is helping me to be different and to heal. And like David, as I get healing, I'm trying to help other people who are in those spots to heal. I'm trying to see if I can enroll in the university or somewhere where I can do these programs and so on. Now, one other question. If someone who is, as we say in Guyana, plain spoken and straightforward, is that person exhibiting any type of anger? Thank you.
Thank you for sharing with us your story, Sister Ruth. And I pray that God continues that healing process, because what you described for us is not easy. It's not an easy experience to deal with. And I think that your anger in this case was justified. But of course, the behavior is what we want to pay attention to. But I pray that God grants complete healing, both you and your daughter and all of the relatives involved, for your loss. There is one thing to be assertive, and it's another thing to be aggressive. So I can be plain spoken without being abrasive. I can say what's on my mind to you without saying it in a way that is, embarrassing or hurtful or, anger inducing. Sometimes people who describe themselves as being plain spoken are actually just aggressive and abrasive and angry. So they're not necessarily the same thing. All right. I can say to you, this behavior needs to stop. I don't like it. And that's being plain spoken. But there are other ways that I could say that and call it plain spoken when in fact it's just angry. So there's a thin line between being plain spoken and assertive and being aggressive and nasty. So it is all about how we frame our words and about how we frame our statements and what is the thought process that goes into what we're saying. Why are we saying what we're saying, and why are we saying it in the way that we're saying it? That is what makes the difference. most times I have found that most times people who describe themselves as plain spoken are in fact just angry and aggressive. And I was one of those people too. Maybe God is still working with me.
Amazing. I never knew you were aggressive. You were
Yeah.
always very quiet. Okay.
Right. So I felt that, you know, I'm quiet until people upset me. So it's not my fault. It's people's fault. But when I did get it, when I, you know, even now sometimes it is still it is still an ongoing struggle. But I'm better than I used to be, and I thank God for that. But when I did, you know, when the amygdala did take over, I almost invariably said things that afterwards I was ashamed of, and I was embarrassed about, and I felt guilty about.
Amen. God is a wonderful God. And
And you can
thank
say that
everybody.
again.
Thank you for your comments. And I'm happy, Dr. Campbell, I'm very happy to know that you've just said what you said. At least I've never made you angry back in the days. Okay, that's good. That's good to know. All right. I see another hand raised. Donette, you can go ahead, my dear.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Sister Dawn. Brother Campbell, I must say thanks to you for sharing on this topic. You know, this topic has been something that um, I wanted to understand. And I think you brings it out in so many different ways. And you have shared, you know, the effect that it has upon us, which I know many of us did not know or aware of. And so, you know, as the sisters say, as you rightly said that you were angry, but your tone of voice now could not tell anybody that you was an angry person, right?
Mhm.
And I can see right there where God stepped in. And if we allow ourselves, you know, to put ourselves at the place where we are willing to let go of this anger thing, God will help us to. In our churches today, you can count the amount of people. For me, it's like most of the people you book up and they're angry. The hands might not want to go up today on the platform, but I can tell you, yes, it's true. And if it was a different
Anger
topic,
is a pandemic.
yes, and if it was a different topic you were talking on, trust me, you would have over 100 or 200 persons online. So I am saying, many of us are not willing to let go. We get to love it
Mm.
because people, when they're angry, it's like it satisfied them. And I realized, I said to myself, God, why most of the people I buck up on is angry when you talk to them? And I said, well, maybe the Lord is working on me. I too have my bit of anger with my children when I speak to them at times, yes. But let me say this. You see, the health message that we get, it really, really helps. I think this
Mm.
is where my changes start to take place. When I change my lifestyle and the food that I eat, it brings transformation mentally, spiritually, physically in my system. And because of that, it brings me down to a calm level. No matter what people will do, I will stay right there with God. So, you know, we have to be willing for that changes to take place, and it will take place, you know. So I thank you very much. And I really love this presentation. And I will really share it at my church as I go along in my ministry. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sister Donette.
Thank you indeed. We do have some comments in the meanwhile, if persons, let me look for questions. All right, persons are just responding to what they heard generally. And while you were talking about anger and some of the symptoms or characteristics that will define if we're angry or not, we had some comments on that. Sister Veronica was saying that sometimes persons clench their teeth. When they're very angry, indigestion and acid reflux is a problem because they're so angry. They can't sleep. What do you say? Are these?
So digestion and acid reflux. Remember I said earlier that the digestive system is suppressed when we're in fight or flight mode. So there are some muscles, let's call them valves, that should be closed. And when they're not, then the acidic content of our stomach is allowed to flow backwards into our esophagus. So when that is not, if we're extremely angry and that is not functioning well, then you can see what happens there. All right. And you're right. It can also cause insomnia because our brain is racing. And because of the stress hormones in our bloodstream, the sleep-wake hormones, the hormones that control our circadian rhythms, they become ineffective, and so we're unable to sleep. And some people, it functions in the opposite way. They when they're really angry, they fall asleep, and they sleep for longer than they should. It's amazing how God made us. It's a whole different conversation. But some of us can have completely opposite responses to the same events. So the thing is, our bodies don't function the way they're supposed to when we are in this state. And it's so important that we think about if you're in that state for a prolonged period of time. Think about if you're angry with somebody and it's been 10 years or 12 years or 20 years, and you have just been in this state for all this time. Think of the havoc that would be wreaking on your body.
Can that contribute to depression?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. And here's another question. How to react against blatant racism?
That's a hard one. I think that the root of racism, besides the sin problem and so on, is a lack of understanding. Sometimes it's a lack of knowledge and a lack of understanding. Sometimes that lack is intentional, but sometimes it's just pure ignorance. So, every once in a while, I watch programs where people learn that they are not the race that they thought they are. They're not pure this, or they're not pure white, and they're shocked that they've been hating on themselves for so long, thinking that, who they were hating were others. If you understand genetics, basic genetics at a high school level, you'd know that there are very few societies there are very few people in our societies who are pure anything. All of us are so mixed up. We got all kinds of different genetic heritages, genetic inputs in our lineage. And so if I hate someone who does not look like me, but I have that in myself, I'm actually hating myself. When you understand these things, you realize that this whole race thing is, so I was asked to facilitate a series of workshops around the country on race and ethnicity and so on. And in preparing for that, I learned so much. I realized that I myself had some racial biases that I thought that I didn't have. And my understanding of that changed my perspective so much and changed my behavior and the way I see people so much that these days, when people behave in racist ways, people who are racist towards others, I feel sorry for them. I feel sorry for them. Now, I don't know if I have the answer to this question, but I think that when we seek understanding, it helps us to manage the way we respond. It helps us to manage the way we respond. So I still get a shot of adrenaline and cortisol when, when I see people treated badly because of their race, or when I am treated badly because of my race. But then I remember that, you know what, these people are doing this because they don't understand what you understand. And I try to take their perspective. And that lack of understanding makes people afraid. We're racist because we're afraid of people who are different from us. And so that person is afraid of me. That's why they behave in the way they are. They don't understand it that way, but that's what it is. And so I feel sorry for them because, I mean, look at me. I can't harm a fly. What are you afraid of? I don't know that I have the answer to that question, but I think that if we understand that we're all children of God and some of us are, in a better space, we've progressed further along in our capacity for thinking and loving and understanding than others, it makes it a little easier to deal with.
Okay, I trust you do a series on that. Obviously, contextualization is necessary because you're international, and that will be very healthy because the world is very angry and horrible, and we see a lot of biases all over, and it's even among the people who call themselves children of God. So I hope you do a series on that as early as possible because that will help us around the world. It will definitely help us around the world. I saw sister, I don't know if it's sister or brother, Sin Bryce. Your hand was raised, and then we'll take Miranda.
Hi, good morning. I I would just like to share this experience. No, I have a 7-year-old grand, and sometimes she's a strong-willed child, and sometimes I get to lose my temper over her, obedience. And one day she said to me, we were going out together. She said, "Granny, why are you angry?" So I said to her, "Well, it's not that I'm angry, So I was trying to explain to her, and then she said, "I know why. I know why, because the house is hot," but she likes to find excuses. you know, and the excuse may not be what it really is, but I thank God I was able to explain to her what, and what I would like, So I would like you to help me a little bit with this strong-willed child and anger.
So my sister, where did she get that from?
Well, I guess it's probably in the family, I want to think.
What about you?
Well, in the family, which includes me.
Okay. Very often, strong-willed people are impatient with other strong-willed people, particularly if they are in authority over those strong-willed people. Here's one way to look at it though. A strong-willed child is exactly that, a child with a strong will. And very often we want to break that will because it threatens our authority. But if we are able to train that child to channel that strength into the right channels, then what will happen is when that child becomes a teenager and her peers say, let's go do X, Y, Z, wrong thing, that child will have the strength to say, I'm not doing that. That's the strong will. You don't want to break that, but you want to teach that child how to channel it in ways and how to respond in ways that are respectful. I think we might have had a session on this maybe a couple of months ago on how we can help children channel, talk back in respectful ways, and to choose their timing and to choose their words. So that's what you want to do, not stop her from talking back, but teach her how to do it in a way that that is not disrespectful to the authority figure, in this case, yourself. All right.
Thank
So
you.
hear her out and deal with whatever issue she brings up, but then say to her, in the future, if something like this comes up, what you can say or how you can deal with it is X, Y, and Z. And then remember that very often, strong-willed parents and parent figures respond in that way to strong-willed children because they're seeing themselves in that person, and that part of themselves feel threatened.
So true.
Thank you, Miranda. Go ahead.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Campbell, for this awesome presentation this morning. Okay, so my 9-year-old daughter Ariane, she's listening in and out, but she would like to know how she can control her anger. Sometimes she gets angry very, very fast. So, and she would tear up anything, or she would even break something if it is her hand, you know, in the way. So, Dr. Campbell, I I was a passionate person. Still just get angry sometimes, but not so quickly. Um, so before you ask, I hear you ask the grandmother just now, where does the child get that from, right? So
You're preempting the
yes,
question.
yes. So yes, maybe she does see some of that in me, but she just get angry very, very fast and like don't know how to control it. So she would like to know how she can control that.
All right. All right. So she's going to need a lot of your help. So my older daughter was similar. She'd get angry about anything really quickly. And one day she asked me, and this could be a long story, I'm skipping out big parts of it. She asked me, I was saying to her, you know what, when I was your age, I struggled in the same way. And she said, so how did you fix that? And I shared some of the things that I learned. Of course, it took me much longer to get to that place than it took her. She's now in her early 20s, and she's such a calm, such a measured, even-tempered person. Sometimes I thank God, but sometimes I wonder if it was the same 12-year-old that we were dealing with. But a big part of it was sharing with her that, you know what, I was the same way, and these are some of the things that I do now to help deal with it. That's one, because sometimes we make our children feel like we were perfect, and they feel hopeless because they think to themselves, I can't achieve that level of perfection. So don't just say I used to be angry, but always have tips as to how did I manage it so that I'm not that person anymore. So that's one. What I would like to say to your daughter, is it Ariana?
Yes, Ariana.
Okay, Ari. I always shorten people's name. Please pardon me. Um, One of the things that you can try to do is when something gets you angry, ask for some time to step away from it. Like, sometimes you can say to your mom, Mom, I'm feeling really upset now. Can I have 5 minutes? And go to a quiet space and just breathe. And sometimes that can help you to release some of that feeling of anger so that you don't throw things or raise your voice or say something rude or disrespectful. Just ask for 5 minutes. And I'm glad that your mom is here to hear me saying to you that this is one way to work through this. Because sometimes as parents, we want the child to respond right away. And sometimes the child needs some time to process it. Remember, we said that one way of dealing with anger is to slow your response down. And so if you're feeling really angry now, your auntie might not understand how to deal with that, or your teacher might not understand how you're dealing with it. But I feel like it might be safe to say to your mom, so don't try this at school, or don't try this away from home. But you can say to your mom, Mommy, can I have 5 minutes to calm myself down? And when that happens, take some time, breathe a little bit, talk to God. That's something I do. When people come into my office and they're mad and they're, because anger is contagious. I am sitting there while they're talking and I'm not saying anything. I'm just praying to God, Lord, please help me manage my tongue. Please help me control. Please give me words. Be with my mouth like you were with Moses and teach me what I should say. And while they're talking, that's what I'm doing in my heart, praying. And that helps me to relax. You could try counting to 10 in Spanish. Learn how to count in Spanish and try that and see how that works for you. I hope that my responses were helpful in some way.
Thank you, Dr. Campbell.
You're most welcome, Ariana.
Okay, thank you so much. Glad to hear Ariana's voice. Such a lovely, lovely little girl.
Yes.
And thank you, Dr. Campbell, because your response just was not just directed to the parent, but I think as educators, we too have those struggles within the classroom. And we have to know how to deal with that, especially if we are strong-willed individuals too. The clashes, we see the clashes very well.
Let me add, please, sorry. Let me add, sorry,
yes.
sometimes. One of the things that we can do
nice and
as
easy
adults, someone's mic is not muted. We as adults can see in children when they are beginning to lose it. And we can, remember that when a person is hijacked by their amygdala, they can't reason. And sometimes we're still trying to tell them how to behave, and they're in their feelings. They can't hear us. It doesn't make any sense to them. And we're trying to tell them, no, you have to behave in this way, and this is wrong, and they can't hear you. Because the part of their brain that's dealing with that is suppressed, is shut down. And so sometimes we can say to a person, I see that you're getting angry. Would you like to take 5 minutes to calm yourself down? We can help them manage it. And so later on, they learn to do that for themselves. All right, we teach them to regulate, so they learn how to regulate themselves. I see that you're getting really angry. Would you like to take 5 minutes to calm down, and then you can come back and we'll talk about it? We can do that. In fact, we have a responsibility to do that as parents. Instead of, allowing their anger to trigger our own anger, and then we respond in anger, and so it's it's fire and gasoline and fire, and we're not getting any place, but in the wrong direction really fast.
Yes, thank you. Very, very helpful. There is a question: does people who didn't deal with grief be sensitive to anger? And I think here's a backdrop, especially men, because men are told that they shouldn't cry, therefore they cry inside. How can one help such persons?
Okay, so I didn't see that question. I suspect that it was asked by a lady who wants to help some gentleman in her life.
Yes.
And yes, you're right. It's not just with men, but any unresolved, difficult issue that has not been dealt with can show up and channel itself through anger. And so sometimes it takes for a person to sit down and really process the emotions associated with that negative experience. And when they're able to process it, then they find that they're no longer angry. Don't assume, though, that because a person doesn't cry, that they're not dealing with it in a healthy way, because crying is not the only healthy way to deal with grief. All right, some people find other healthy outlets for that grief process, channels for that grief process. So it could be something else. But yes, you're right. Grief, guilt, hurt, bitterness, any angry emotional experience, any emotional experience that has not been properly dealt with could show up as anger later on.
I see Brother David cheering on. You had a question, Brother David? Samuel?
Yeah, definitely. My question is, there are some people who it takes a very long time for them to get angry. But then there's the striking point when they reach to this mountainous point. When they get angry, nothing can change that. What do you do in that situation?
You just read my horoscope there, brother. That's my story right there.
Well, that's me. That's
Yeah.
why I'm saying.
Right.
Because sometimes when I get angry, when you reach me to that point, there's nothing, not even, I mean, I can count to 6 million or whatever. It takes 2 or 3 days for that to go away because there's a grudge behind it too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that part of that is because we hold on to the little microaggressions for so long. We hold on to the little things so they build up. So there are lots of things that are happening and we're not dealing with it because we tell ourselves, not a big deal. If it is a
Exactly.
big deal, though, if we can acknowledge to ourselves that this is in fact something that is triggering for me, this is something that I don't like, and we can deal with it in those small doses, then it doesn't need to build up. Because what happens is, if 10 different people upset me over the course of a month, and I just let it go, and then the 11th person that comes along has pushed me over the edge, then they have to deal with all of the anger that I've been storing up from those 10 different people. I might not realize that that's what is happening, but my response is usually over the top. And it is beyond what is called for in this situation. So what you're feeling is, you're getting all the ammunition that I've been saving from them 10 other people that I. So if we can learn how to deal with those smaller issues, give ourselves time to process it. It doesn't always mean that you have to confront the person, but think about what you're feeling, process it, find different ways of thinking about it, and move on. Then we're less likely to build up to that point where we're exploding on someone or imploding on ourselves, because either way, damage is being done. Sometimes to ourselves, sometimes to that other person, and sometimes to both of us. So deal with the little things so that they don't grow into a big pile.
Well, what I do a lot of the times is either I turn to some music or I laugh. And that laugh might not even be a good one too.
Yes. Yeah. Sometimes we'll have to prevent ourselves from doing other things. And it is effective in the moment. We still need to sit down, sometimes quietly, and process what we went through and find a different way to think about it so that it will change the way we feel about it and therefore change our actions later on.
Okay. Well, I don't even know what to say about that one, but
Give it a shot, brother. Work for me. Work for me.
All right.
All right, thank you. We're winding down. Actually, we take one more question, and it is in the chat. It says here, how can men be helped as they generally don't like to go for counseling, even educated professors? So, how would you advise?
Even counseling professionals. I just had a conversation with a group of men 2 evenings ago. I was speaking to a men's ministries group. And one of the things that we agreed on is that we have to meet men where they are. Men are not as enthusiastic as women about attending conferences and webinars and so on, particularly if we're going to have conversations about emotional things. But men will show up to get a health check if it's free. So that's one way of, what one organization did is they provided free blood pressure testing and diabetes testing and prostate testing. But before you had access to the medical professionals, there was a 1-hour session dealing with, an emotion, men and emotions. So there are different ways, some organizations, they organize a baseball game. And in the Caribbean, we like dominoes, so it might be a domino competition. And somewhere in there, you include work, because men work best when they're doing something that they like, when they're doing something that can distract them from the fact that, what I'm really doing here now is facing my emotions. So you have to meet men where they are, because they're not going to come, we're not going to come to where you are. All right. So we have to find ways of meeting men where they are, because that has been found to be really effective in helping men to access the help that they need. In fact, when a lot of men, in a lot of cases, so I maybe, give the example. Last evening, we had, the guys call it a swallow ship, evening before last. And so the men were invited to have an evening meal. And then we had a 1 hour presentation. And the men asked so many questions that the 1 hour presentation went to 2.5 hours. And we didn't even want to leave when it was over. And then men were taking my number and asking, how could we come for counseling? So when we're able to identify something that men would want to do, and we bring them in that space and we expose them to, good information, then they take the lead from there.
Okay, awesome. I guess they want to be in control. So usually it's the female that advise them to go get counseling.
Yeah, we don't want to hear that from you. I don't need counseling. You need counseling.
Yes, I think that's the problem, because if there is a group of men, then it's fine. Women are not there to disturb them. Since they were born, the woman is telling them what to do. Moms. Then they got married. Now the woman is doing the same thing. I know you're agreeing with me. It's like, don't tell me what to do.
Yes, don't tell me what to do.
Okay.
I don't have a problem. I see in the chat that Anne is asking me to repeat. So when you see that, and you don't, it does not just work with children. It works with adults too. You have to be very careful how you say it with adults. But for a child, you see a child is becoming angry, becoming worked up, put a name on the emotion. I see that you're feeling really disappointed about this. Would you like to take 5 minutes to think about it a little bit, and then we can come back and talk about it? So that is and it's not always anger. All right. The child is asking for you to pick up something for them at the store, and you're saying, no, we're not going to pick this up. The child will be disappointed. That's not anger, that's disappointment. I see that you're feeling really disappointed, and I understand. Would you like to take some time to think about it for yourself, and then we can talk about it later on? So name the feeling. I see you're disappointed. I see you're hurt. I see you're feeling embarrassed. Would you like to take some time to think about it for a little bit, and then we can talk later on? All right. Teach them to name the feeling, so that they're not adding radiator fluid when what is really needed is a new tire.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Campbell. We've come to the end of the session. And let me see if there is any question here. Okay, there was just a comment from Tam. She says she is very happy that she doesn't get upset easily anymore. So we thank God for that. All right. We are very grateful for your presentations, the series on anger and how to manage it, and being Christian, and how to be Christian-like at home and wherever we go. So for those of you who have been truly blessed, we will encourage you to drop your thank yous in the chat. And at the same time, for those of you who would like to contact Dr. Campbell, his information is up finally. It is up on the screen, and you can.
You've muted your mic.
Oh, sorry. Yes, he has his private consultancy practice. He's a Christian. He's a Seventh Adventist Christian, and you've heard him, and you know that he is capable of dealing with your situations. For those men who are here and you'd like to get in contact with him, there is his information. His phone number and his email address. For those of you who like to support, you can do the same thing through the information and contact that is given. And the thank yous are being shared in the chat, so I trust that you take a look. And just note, keep close to Macy, and we will try to get Dr. Campbell back as early as possible to do a series, especially on biases and racism and all of that jumbled together. How do we deal with it? Because we see it being very public, and it doesn't matter in what context, because we can be in this country or that country, at home, at work, in communities, wherever we see it being done all the time. So we would definitely be happy if you can do a series on that too, since it came up today, and also on another one that you did mention in your presentation. So we will have a quick word of prayer. Let me see if Brother David, are you still on? Samuel? Because we have more than one Davids here. It'd be great to have a man closing us off with a word of prayer. Let's see. Oh, we also have Pengaka. I don't know if
Yeah,
you
my
can.
phone, I'm there, but my phone was away from me, so I couldn't put on my mic.
Okay, can you close us off with a word of prayer? Thank you.
Yes, I can. Heavenly Father, we want to thank you for waking us up this morning. Thank you for the information we've gotten about anger. And we know that you say we can still be angry, but sin not. So bless us and keep us as we go out through the rest of this week, and help us to find and meet someone that we can be friendly with and share your word. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. We will end this now.